Maybe your neighbor just got laid off, your favorite restaurant closed last month, your credit card balance is creeping up for the third month in a row, and you're telling yourself it's temporary. But what if it isn't? What if the recession everyone's debating isn't coming in 6 months or a year? What if it's already here and the numbers just haven't caught up yet? Because that's exactly how recessions work. You don't find out you were in one until you're already standing in the wreckage. Here's what almost nobody talks about. The National Bureau of Economic Research, the official body that declares recessions, doesn't call them in real time. They wait. They gather data for 6 to 18 months, run the analysis, and then announce what millions of Americans already lived through. The 2008 crisis officially started in December 2007, declared December 2008. By the time the NBER put it in writing, Lehman Brothers was already rubble and retirement accounts had been torched. So right now, today, you could be living inside a recession and the government won't tell you for another year. Which means waiting for the official announcement is exactly the wrong strategy. The unemployment rate sits at 4.4%. Sounds manageable, right? But that number has a quiet asterisk attached to it. It only counts people who are actively looking for work, meaning they applied somewhere in the last 4 weeks. Since the pandemic, more than 1.6 million Americans have simply stopped looking. They vanished from the statistic entirely. And labor force participation has dropped nearly 1.5% below pre-pandemic levels. These aren't people who retired early to a beach house. These are people who got beaten down by rejection and stopped trying. But here's the part that should make your stomach drop. When one full-time worker gets laid off and picks up 2 part-time gigs to survive, the government records that as 2 jobs added. Net growth. So the headline cheers while the reality quietly hollows out. Right now, 4.4 million Americans are working part-time because they cannot find full-time work. No benefits, no stability, just the illusion of employment layered over genuine financial desperation. When the financial media celebrates strong consumer spending, they are not lying, but they're not telling you the full story either. Americans aren't spending because they're flush, they're spendy. Not because they're borrowing. Credit card debt just crossed $1.28 trillion. The average interest rate on those balances, 22%. Think about that. People are financing their groceries at 22%. That's not consumer confidence. That's a slow financial bleed dressed up in spending data. And the savings rate confirms it. Historically, Americans saved roughly 8 cents of every dollar earned. That number has collapsed to around 4.5%. For anyone managing serious wealth, this matters beyond your own balance sheet. Consumer spending drives roughly 70% of GDP. When the credit runs dry, and it will, that engine stalls. We watched this exact sequence in 2006 and 2007. The spending looked robust right up until it didn't. There is an index designed specifically to see recessions coming before they arrive. It's called the Leading Economic Index. It has declined for 6 consecutive months. That same 6-month pattern appeared before both the 2001 dot-com recession and the 2008 financial crisis. And it's not just that one signal. Commercial bankruptcies are up over 7%, now sitting at more than 24,000 filings, the highest level in over a decade. The companies that floated through the pandemic on cheap debt are now drowning in a tighter rate environment. Each of these signals alone could be noise, but unemployment quality deteriorating, credit expanding, savings vanishing, the leading index declining, and bankruptcies spiking, that's not noise. That's a pattern. And this particular pattern has a very consistent historical track record of what comes next. I want you to think about someone you know, maybe a sibling, a college friend, a former colleague, someone smart, hardworking, who did everything right, saved consistently, built something real. And then 2008 arrived, and they lost 40% of their portfolio in 9 months because they believed the official story, because the Fed said things were manageable, because the headlines said consumer spending was strong. The people who came through that recession intact weren't the ones who panicked, but they also weren't the ones who sleepwalked in. They were paying attention to the signals underneath the headlines. They trusted what they could see with their own eyes more than what they heard on television. That same skill, reading what's real beneath what's reported, that's the only edge that reliably survives every cycle. So here's the question I'll leave you with. When the NBER finally makes this recession official, and they will, are you going to be the person who saw it coming, or the person who finds out a year after the fact? The gap between the measured economy and the lived economy is real, and that gap is exactly where recessions hide until it's too late to prepare. If you're tracking these signals in your own business, your own portfolio, your own industry, drop it in the comments. The sharpest economic intelligence doesn't come from institutions. It comes from people actually living inside the economy. Subscribe if you want to keep seeing what's underneath the surface, because this is just the beginning of that conversation.